In just 91 seconds, $2.7 million in foreign donations would be exposed. Kash Patel didn't expect to be destroyed. He expected to destroy Chris Van Hollen. Cameras captured everything. The Senate chamber erupt. What did Patel reveal about Democratic donors that made the FBI's own files turn against him? At exactly 2:47 p.m. on January 23, 2025, FBI Director Kash Patel walked into Senate Judiciary Committee Room 226 like an investigator who had seen too many lies. The mahogany-paneled chamber buzzed with tension as reporters filled every available seat, their cameras focused on the witness table where Patel would face his most hostile interrogation since taking office. Behind him sat stacks of declassified memos, FBI case files, and what appeared to be financial documents that would soon shake Washington to its core. Senator Chris Van Hollen, the ranking Democrat from Maryland, sat like a senator carved in ambition, his American flag pin gleaming under the harsh committee room lights. His legal advisors whispered final strategies, while press aides prepared for what they believed would be Patel's political execution. Van Hollen's jaw was already clenched with anticipation, his knuckles white as he gripped his prepared questions. This wasn't just another oversight hearing. This was a calculated attempt to end Kash Patel's career. The opening salvos came quickly. Van Hollen leaned into his microphone with practiced precision, his voice carrying the moral authority he'd cultivated over 2 decades in Washington. Director Patel, the American people deserve answers about your controversial tenure at the FBI. Reports suggest systematic abuse of surveillance powers, targeting of political opponents, and a complete breakdown of constitutional protections under your leadership. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Patel's eyes narrowed as he shuffled through his documents, his fingers moving with surgical precision across classified folders marked with red security stamps. Senator Van Hollen, Patel began, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone about to reveal devastating secrets. Before we discuss the FBI's operations, perhaps we should examine who's been funding your oversight of those operations. Van Hollen's face shifted almost imperceptibly, but the cameras caught it. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his features as Patel reached for a thick manila envelope. These are the financial disclosure forms you filed with the Senate Ethics Committee, Patel continued, extracting documents with theatrical precision. But more interesting are the ones you didn't file. The chamber froze as Patel held up a series of bank statements and wire transfer records. Between March 2023 and November 2024, your Political Action Committee received $2.7 million in donations routed through shell companies connected to Chinese state-owned enterprises. The dollar amount hit the room like a physical blow. Van Hollen's legal advisors immediately began whispering urgently, their faces draining of color, as they recognized the implications. That's absurd, Van Hollen stammered, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Patel smiled coldly and produced another document. Beijing International Holdings, registered in Delaware but owned by subsidiaries of China Development Bank, $470,000 in March 2023. Eternal Prosperity LLC, traced back to Chinese Ministry of State Security front companies, $680,000 in August. Each revelation struck with precision, and gasps rippled through the press gallery. Twitter exploded within minutes as journalists live tweeted the bombshell revelations. Van Hollen China and Papen exposes began trending as millions watched the exchange unfold on C-SPAN. Fox News cut into regular programming with breaking news alerts, while CNN scrambled to verify the financial documents. Patel was methodically unveiling. The FBI director seemed completely in control, his preparation evident in every calculated pause and dramatic reveal. Van Hollen tried to regain his footing, claiming the accusations were desperate deflection tactics, but Patel wasn't finished. Senator, would you like me to read the private communications between your chief of staff and representatives of these shell companies? Patel asked with deadly calm. Or perhaps we should discuss the policy positions you suddenly adopted after these payments began. Van Hollen's hands began trembling slightly as he gripped his microphone. The committee room had become a courtroom, and he was rapidly becoming the defendant. But at exactly 4:20 p.m., 91 seconds after Patel's devastating expose of Van Hollen's donors, everything changed. Senator Dick Durbin, the committee chairman, received an urgent note from his chief counsel. His face went ashen as he read its contents. Director Patel, Durbin interrupted with unprecedented gravity. I've just been informed that the Department of Justice Inspector General has completed his investigation into your use of FBI resources. Patel's confident expression flickered for the first time. The investigation that was supposed to remain confidential until conclusion, he asked, his voice betraying the slightest hint of concern. Durbin nodded grimly. The one that has just been declassified by order of the Attorney General, and the findings are deeply troubling. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Durbin opened a folder marked Confidential OIG Report. Even the cameras stopped their mechanical whirring as everyone strained to hear what would come next. According to the Inspector General's investigation, Durbin began reading with judicial solemnity. Director Kash Patel personally authorized the surveillance of 47 American citizens without proper legal justification between April and December 2024. These included journalists, political activists, and members of Congress. Silence fell like a tomb over the chamber. Patel's face had gone from confident to defensive in mere seconds, his hands now gripping the witness table with white knuckles. The investigation reveals that Director Patel used FBI counterintelligence resources to conduct opposition research on his political critics, including members of this very committee. Durbin continued. Phone records, financial transactions, personal communications, all accessed without warrants or proper judicial oversight. Van Hollen, who moments earlier had been on the defensive about his donor connections, now leaned forward with renewed confidence. The power dynamic had completely reversed in under 2 minutes. Director Patel, Van Hollen said, his voice now steady and accusatory. While you've been reading my financial disclosures, did you obtain those through illegal FBI surveillance? Patel tried to maintain his composure, but sweat was now visible on his forehead under the harsh committee room lights. The documents I presented were obtained through legitimate congressional oversight channels, he responded. But his earlier authority had evaporated. Van Hollen smiled grimly and produced his own folder. Then perhaps you can explain why FBI surveillance logs show your personal authorization code was used to access my banking records 17 times between October and December 2024. The revelation hit Patel like a sledgehammer. The very documents he'd used to attack Van Hollen had apparently been obtained through the FBI abuse that was now being exposed. The Inspector General's report specifically mentions your investigation of Senator Van Hollen as an example of political targeting, Durbin added, driving the knife deeper. You used the FBI's most sensitive capabilities to build a political attack file against a sitting senator. The committee room erupted as reporters realized they were witnessing not just political theater, but potentially criminal exposure in real time. Anti-Pol abuse and FBI date began trending alongside the earlier Van Hollen hashtags. As the story took a dramatic turn, CNN broke into programming with breaking FBI director accused of illegal surveillance. Fox News, which had been praising Patel's donor revelations minutes earlier, found themselves covering their own hero's apparent downfall. The social media explosion was instantaneous and merciless. Clips of Patel's confident donor accusations followed immediately by his stammering denials about FBI abuse created perfect viral content that spread across platforms at lightning speed. Even conservative commentators who had supported Patel began distancing themselves as the severity of the surveillance abuse became clear. The transformation was complete, from FBI director to potential defendant in 91 seconds flat. Director Patel, came the next question from Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. The Inspector General's report indicates you personally signed surveillance orders, targeting not just Senator Van Hollen, but also journalists at The Washington Post, The New York Times, and CNN. How do you justify using the FBI's counterintelligence capabilities against American media? Patel's response was barely audible. I cannot comment on ongoing investigations, he mumbled. The standard government deflection that sounded hollow after his earlier dramatic revelations. The irony was devastating. The man who had just exposed political corruption was now exposed as the architect of systematic government abuse. Van Hollen sensed the moment and struck with surgical precision. So let me understand this correctly, Director Patel. You obtained information about my donors through illegal FBI surveillance, then used this committee hearing to present that illegally obtained information as evidence of my corruption. The logic trap was perfectly constructed, and Patel had no escape route. Within minutes, Republican committee members who had been supporting Patel's donor revelations began backpedaling furiously. Senator Lindsey Graham, visibly uncomfortable, attempted damage control. Director Patel, these are serious allegations. The American people need to know, did you or did you not use FBI resources for political purposes? But Patel's credibility had been shattered. His earlier confidence had transformed into visible panic as he realized the scope of his exposure. The FBI operates under strict legal guidelines, he managed to say, but his voice lacked any conviction. The committee room had become his courtroom, and the evidence was overwhelming. The very senators who might have defended him were now distancing themselves as the political liability became clear. CNN legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin would later call it the fastest political self-destruction in modern Washington history. The final blow came when Senator Amy Klobuchar produced additional pages from the Inspector General's report. Director Patel, did you personally review surveillance transcripts of Senator Van Hollen's private phone calls with his family? She asked with prosecutorial precision. Patel's face went completely white. The FBI has protocols, he stammered, but couldn't complete the sentence. The report indicates you listened to recordings of the senator discussing his daughter's college applications and his wife's medical treatments. Klobuchar continued relentlessly. How is that related to national security? The personal nature of the surveillance abuse sent shockwaves through the chamber. This wasn't just political espionage. It was deeply personal violation of a public servant's private life. Even Republican senators looked disgusted as the full scope of Patel's abuse became clear. Chairman Durbin called for a recess as the hearing devolved into chaos. Reporters shouted questions at Patel as he attempted to leave the witness table, his FBI security detail forming a protective corridor. The man who had entered the chamber like a confident prosecutor was now fleeing like a defendant facing life imprisonment. Van Hollen, meanwhile, held an impromptu press conference in the hallway. What we witnessed today was not just an abuse of power, but a systematic attack on American democracy itself, he declared to the assembled cameras. Director Patel used the FBI like his personal secret police force, targeting anyone who dared to question his authority. The visual contrast was stark, Van Hollen appearing presidential and principled, while Patel skulked away under protection. That evening, President Trump faced unprecedented pressure to fire the FBI director he had personally selected. Republican senators privately urged the White House to cut ties with Patel before the scandal consumed the entire administration. Conservative media personalities, who had praised Patel's appointment, began calling for his resignation. The donor revelations that had seemed so powerful in the morning were completely overshadowed by the surveillance abuse scandal. What had started as Patel's triumph had become his complete downfall in less than 2 hours. Legal experts on evening news shows discussed potential criminal charges for civil rights violations, abuse of power, and conspiracy to violate the constitutional rights of American citizens. The Department of Justice announced within 48 hours that it was opening a criminal investigation into Patel's conduct. The FBI's own Office of Professional Responsibility launched an internal investigation that would ultimately recommend his termination. Congressional Democrats introduced articles of impeachment, while Republicans struggled to defend the surveillance state they had traditionally opposed. The irony was complete. The FBI director who claimed to be draining the swamp had created his own cesspool of corruption. Van Hollen's donor connections, while problematic, paled in comparison to systematic government surveillance abuse. Patel had won the battle, but lost the war, exposing his opponent only to expose himself far more devastatingly. The aftermath was swift and merciless. By midnight, Patel resign was trending globally, with over 2.8 million tweets. CNN obtained leaked excerpts from the Inspector General's report, showing Patel had ordered surveillance on Supreme Court justices' personal communications. Fox News host Tucker Carlson, who had praised Patel just hours earlier, opened his show with "When the FBI Becomes the Secret Police," America dies. The Washington Post's editorial board, never supportive of Patel, called for immediate criminal prosecution under the Espionage Act. Even former Attorney General William Barr, who had originally recommended Patel for promotion, issued a devastating statement. No FBI director in American history has so thoroughly corrupted the institution he was sworn to protect. Van Hollen's office released a timeline showing 17 separate instances where FBI surveillance of his family coincided with Patel's public attacks on Democratic senators. The targeting wasn't random. It was systematic political warfare, using America's most powerful intelligence apparatus. FBI field agents began leaking their own concerns about Patel's leadership, with the FBI Agents Association issuing an unprecedented statement, distancing themselves from their own director. "We joined the FBI to protect America, not to spy on Americans," read their official release. The institution was eating itself alive, and Patel had provided the poison. Within hours, leaked NSA intercepts revealed Patel had personally requested priority surveillance packages on 12 sitting senators, including 3 Republicans who had questioned his nomination. The surveillance included GPS tracking, encrypted message interception, and financial monitoring that extended to family members and staff. Senator Marco Rubio, a longtime Trump ally, called it Stasi-level domestic espionage that would make Vladimir Putin jealous. The revelation that Patel had spied on members of his own party created an immediate crisis for Republican leadership. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who rarely spoke against Trump appointees, issued a terse statement. "This behavior is incompatible with American values and constitutional governance." At 11:47 p.m. that same evening, President Trump's legal team advised him that keeping Patel in position could expose the administration to criminal conspiracy charges. The president's Truth Social account remained silent for the first time in months. A digital silence that spoke volumes about the political radioactivity surrounding his FBI director. Justice Department prosecutors were already drafting subpoenas for Patel's personal communications, while federal judges expressed outrage that their own chambers may have been compromised by FBI surveillance overreach. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a badge or a subpoena. It's truth, archived and revealed at the right second. What happens when a leader who built power on secrecy is undone by evidence? If patriotism can't survive transparency, was it ever real? The Patel case would be studied for decades as an example of how quickly political fortunes can reverse when truth encounters power. In 91 seconds, American democracy had defended itself against its own protectors, proving that no one, not even the FBI director, is above the law. This dramatized story is inspired by real events and public figures. All dialogue and incidents are fictionalized for commentary and educational purposes. This is not intended to defame, but to explore themes of power, truth, and accountability in American democracy.